I just listened to all 9 albums by Steely Dan, and here are my thoughts. So going into this, I was only aware of one song by Steely Dan, and that was the one song everyone knows by them, Do It Again.
On the street, yeah, you go back, Jack, do it again. We'll turn it right.
That did not really end up being the only song that I knew by them. I just had to get a little deeper into their discography to find the song Peg, which I recognized once I had started listening to it.
It will come back to you. Then the shadow falls. You see it all repeat. It's your favorite foreign movie.
But yeah, that was it. So pretty much all of this was new to me. So yeah, I'm excited to get into it. So Steely Dan is a jazz rock band. Sometimes they were called a jazz pop rock band. More recently, they've been referred to as a yacht rock band. I had to dig into that term a little bit. Apparently, yacht rock is a term that has been around for 20 years or so. It originated from a comedy video series. Obviously, the term yacht rock was meant to poke fun at the genre a little bit, but since then, it seems like a lot of fans are kind of owning up to the name, and they're a little self-aware about it. They know that it's a slightly pejorative name, but they like it anyway. That term is born of a stereotype that this music is for older, wealthy men who just want something smooth and jazzy to listen to while they knock back a beer on their boat. Now, Steely Dan is not really my kind of music, so I'm going to be as objective as possible while still telling you some of the feelings that I had about it. Honestly, feelings might be kind of a strong word to use in this context anyway. This music, it's not happy or sad or angry. It's just kind of there to be in hotel lobbies. That doesn't mean I disliked all of it. I have a Steely Dan Greatest Hits playlist that I added songs to as I was going through it, and there were 2 albums that genuinely impressed me, that I genuinely liked. So Steely Dan starts off in 1972 with their first release. It's an album called Can't Buy a Thrill. And while this album has 2 of their biggest hits, Do It Again, which I referred to earlier, and then another hit called Reelin' in the Years, this is the first time I heard it. It's a very good song. Many fans don't regard this to be even close to being their best album. And I can see why. Despite those 2 songs jumping out at me, the rest of the album was pretty laborious to get through. A lot of it sounded boring and uninspired, even when you try to tune your ears to what this kind of music is meant to accomplish. The song Only a Fool Would Say That is on this album. I didn't find that song musically very interesting, but lyrically it has kind of an interesting backstory. This is their rebuttal to the famous John Lennon song Imagine. So they hear about John Lennon's vision for a utopian worldview. You know, imagine a world with no nation, no racial identity, no religious identity, whatever. And they kind of clap back and say, only a fool would say that. One criticism that is in this song specifically, which I guess I can see where they're coming from, is the criticism that John Lennon was out of touch when he wrote Imagine. That, imagine if you're a blue collar 9 to 5 working guy, your job just sucks your soul, you go home, you're tired, and then you hear this rich guy from a New York penthouse apartment talk about his dream for a perfect world. The reason I'm diving into the theme of this song so much is because it is a good example of something Steely Dan does a lot. They are consistently pretty judgmental and negative in their lyrics. Just in general, it seems like a big part of their strategy or identity is to appeal to pseudo-intellectual individualists by pointing the finger at every movement and every trend and saying, there's something wrong with that, there's something stupid about that, something out of touch about that. And there is, of course, a valid place for societal and cultural criticism, but that attitude can kind of wear on me if, A, you're not proposing any worldviews of your own, you're just criticizing everyone else's, and B, you spend a lot of time criticizing movements that may, for all intents and purposes, be well-intentioned or relatively harmless, but not a lot of time criticizing movements or ideologies that are more harmful. And that's just my opinion. But going back to the music, they released another album in the following year. So Countdown to Ecstasy is released in 1973. And while there isn't very much on this album that I think is as good as the two hits from the previous album, this album is much more solid. It sounds like they're finding more of their sound and their identity and getting a little more comfortable in their creativity. My favorite song by far was the first track, Bodhisattva. And yeah, there were a lot of moments on this album that struggled to be memorable to me specifically. And maybe that would improve if I gave this album multiple listens, but pound for pound, this album is quite a bit better than the previous one. They continue their upturn with the release of Pretzel Logic in 1974. That upturn is my opinion, by the way. Steely Dan fans seem to be kind of divided on this section of albums. A lot of them consider Countdown to Ecstasy to be one of their best. But in the beginning of this video, when I said there were two albums that genuinely impressed me and that I will be revisiting, Pretzel Logic is one of them. And to put it simply, the thing that props this album up is just the sheer number of quality songs. Like the first track, Ricky Don't Lose That Number, that was great. Any Major Dude Will Tell You That was a good song. Berrytown, Parker's Band. These were all songs that I added to my Steely Dan Greatest Hits playlist. It's not always easy to tell when Steely Dan is on a creative high versus a creative slump because all their music is just so focused on flowing so easily and so smoothly. But this is one album where I just think they were really in touch. They focused on these little details that really added up to the whole picture. Their fourth album, released in 1975, is called Katie Lied. I thought this album was a bit of a downturn from the previous two. It is still solid enough that I can tell that that they're not necessarily phoning it in or anything like that. A couple of pretty good songs on here too, like Black Friday and Rose Darling and Dr. Wu. Those are the songs that stood out to me on this album, but they still barely reached a threshold that I would consider for adding them onto my greatest hits playlist. Next, we got The Royal Scam, released in 1976. This album I thought was a slight upturn from Katie Lied, somewhat similar in quality when I listened to the entire albums front to back. But I liked this one a little bit better because Kid Charlemagne and Haitian Divorce, both songs that stood out to me quite a bit. Now by this point, the band stopped touring a couple albums ago, and the band participation and membership and songwriting has really centered itself around two main members. These two members were Walter Becker and Donald Fagen. And around this time, they're slightly changing their strategy. So Steely Dan's always been a jazz rock band, but towards the earlier days, I heard 60% rock and 40% jazz. They're kind of flipping those, getting a little bit jazzier, and they're putting a lot more minute details in their music. This requires more and more session musicians to be brought in. The albums are taking longer to produce. They're costing more money to produce because these two guys are just obsessively focusing on how they can put what they hear in their heads into an audio format. And they reached the culmination of their skills and creativity with their following album, Asia. So this album was released in 1977, and it is just an amazing piece of music. This album genuinely stood out to me. It is everything that this genre should be. I think my favorite song on this album is the title track. It is beautiful, but Deacon Blues is great. Peg is also great. And then the final song, Josie, also had really stood out to me. Now after this, some creative differences and drug-related drama and infighting puts a strain on Becker and Fagen, and they released their last album for a long time. That album is 1980's Gaucho. I did not like this album. I even listened to it twice just in case there was something I missed on the first one. From what it looks like a lot of Steely Dan fans really like this album, so take my word with a grain of salt. But when I was listening to it, I just thought this is the culmination of hotel lobby music. If I can point to any song on this album standing out even remotely, I guess it's the title track. They come back 20 years later, though, and release Two Against Nature in the year 2000. This album impressed critics and fans, and when I was going through it, I could tell that this is a pretty good representation of them and their music. I could tell that their creative juices were flowing a little bit. it is at the very least better than Gaucho. When I was listening to it, I thought it's around the similar levels of quality that like Katie lied was. The title track was my favorite song. Musically, I liked the song Cousin Dupree, but the subject matter of the lyrics just detracted from the song a little bit. It's about a guy hitting on his cousin. Now, fun fact about this album, it won a ton of awards. It won a ton of Grammys the year that it came out. Every other album that it was up against was more newer kind of Gen X music. So there's some pop artists like Britney Spears and NSYNC. And then the Marshall Mathers LP by Eminem was also up for a Grammy. And this album won. It beat those others, and that caused a little bit of a cultural animosity between Gen Xers and Boomers, or so I've read, at least. This success launched a successful tour, and they released their final album in 2003. This album is called Everything Must Go. It did not impress critics and fans, and when I was listening to it, it was like if all of the most boring filler tracks from every other Steely Dan album was just put onto one. There was not a single song on this album that stood out to me. That is it for all their official albums. Now, I did listen to another album, if you can call it that. Really, it's a collection of bootleg demos, but it's called The Old Regime. This is a collection of demos that were recorded before they released their first album. Now, with it being bootleg demos, the recording quality is not great, and that does not lend itself to this style of music. If you're listening to this kind of music, the recording quality should be really good. The reason I'm mentioning it, though, is because there's some cool songs on here, and songs that I think if you're a fan of this music, you might already know about it. If you don't, then you should. Android Warehouse was a cool song. There's a really cool version of Brooklyn on here as well. It was on their first album. I actually like this version just musically a little bit better. But I also loved the final two tracks, You Go Where I Go and Sun Mountain. This shows a kind of more sentimental side of Steely Dan that I would like to have seen them explore a little bit further if they had chosen to do so. So yeah, that's everything. There is my album ranking. The top two, Asia and Presso Logic, are genuinely just good albums. The music is just good, and I think that there is appeal there for people who don't necessarily like this kind of music, kind of in the way that I don't necessarily love pop or rap, but there's a few albums in each genre that I swear by. The next two, so Countdown to Ecstasy and The Royal Scam, are solid enough quality albums that if this is a kind of music that you like, this is worth exploring. The next three were albums that as a whole I thought, if I liked this kind of music, I'm sure I'd like them, but they were very boring to me, save for the specific songs from those albums that I had mentioned previously. And then the final two, Gaucho and Everything Must Go, these were albums that I actually disliked, like by quite a bit. Anyways, thank you for watching. Coming up next is Blue Oyster Cult, then I'm going to do Black Sabbath, and then it is going to be Steppenwolf.